Hello. Good afternoon. We'd like to start the second session of our event. We invite Rodrigo Broilo from Facebook to make a presentation on disaster recovery at the edge. Rodrigo, please. Good afternoon, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Rodrigo Broilo.
Como Ad Strategy Manager.
I work at Facebook at the manager, webcast, the pops of Facebook, where they're going to be, when not, and why, internally and obviously externally. And I'm here to talk about network disaster recovery. Many people have plans in their mind. Few have a plan on paper, and very few have tested them. Unfortunately, I don't have a disaster recovery for the presentation because it's quite dark. I'll try to do my best because what matters is not what is on the screen, but what we are here to talk about. So we have various types of products and apps that Facebook has. Some of them are on the screen: Messenger, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. We have some other initiatives, but they're not here as the VR goggles, which is quite cool. Yeah, I've tested it today. It's really awesome. And I'm going to talk a bit about scale, size of the problem. That has been our challenge. The tests that we ran. And what I'm going to talk about here that I think it's important to share to perhaps light a little lamp for everyone. And even if we plan, things fail and will fail. Well, when it comes to internet, it's certain that things will fail. When we talk about scale, in all families of apps on Facebook today, we have about 2.62 billion users, monthly users. In all families, not a single app. And for all those people, we must have an infrastructure supporting more than 300 million photo uploads daily. It's a great challenge. Over 1 million comments, status updates, likes, and posts per minute. And they are single challenges, and they're quite important and require quite innovative solutions that you cannot find off the shelf. So what happens when things fail? This is the last thing anyone would like to see. Doesn't matter, but not this. It's bad, pretty bad. Especially, I believe the majority here represents ISPs offering services to end users or to a service provider that will in turn provide the service. So nobody wants to see this on the screen of their user, and obviously Facebook doesn't either. Here is the demo in the failing of an ad pop. So we have a POP, peering point that we have at a given place or country. And this is a demo of what happens when this POP fails. For any reason whatsoever, because it is there, it's not fail-proof. We see a leap on the green line of latency from one average of 1.2 seconds to 2 seconds. This actually impacts end user, and this demonstrates to us that what we have there is a misalignment in the plant capacity, because that POP of that specific content has failed. And when this happens, we are able to realize on the line, well, we have two lines, egress of traffic over cache of net, and the other one would be from POP. And we see that on that drop, when there is a failure, or we see the other chart of latency, that is an indicator. Well, we have various indicators. Latency is an indicator that is not capturing that usual path, and that is the traffic when it drops, literally, for various reasons, lack of bandwidth, capacity, management of TCP/IP, because it's too far, and it takes a considerable time to recover. After that little valley, I'll call it, it takes time to recover, and it goes back to what it was before. So failures, and our goal is that they should happen, and when they happen, the impact to people should be minimum and not a large or great impact. In 2012, Facebook, we received an alert when the Hurricane Sandy was approaching the coast of the U.S. It was about 150 kilometers of a region of a data center called Ashburn, quite well known. It has it's a quite dense region in terms of data centers, so it's an important hub. It's in the northeast of the United States. And Facebook has redundancy. We have regions. Well, we have a data center. We have a region of a data center. It may be multiple buildings. It's a region that we call. At the time, we had 12 regions. Each region is huge. There are over 100,000 servers per region, running hundreds, thousands of systems of software pieces. And we asked ourselves, what would happen if Ashburn were actually impacted? It was not. What would have happened if it had been hit by Sandy? The question at the time was not something that was understandable by the Facebook team. Nobody said, no, well, it will work. We have 12 regions. So we could not find an answer. And this created some kind of great suspicion and great setback. And we cannot operate like that. If it fails, it needs, well, it will stop working. And we saw how most companies deal with machine shutdowns. This is a sampling of what happened at the time. I think one of the photos, I think on the right-hand side, south of Manhattan, colocation spaces and data centers where there was a flood that were totally flooded, and that's northeastern United States, but it affected Latin America. We have submarine cables, and the SLT is actually reaching those points and actually impacted them, and there was no capacity anymore. So it's an ensemble. We should not think that, well, nothing happens here. I'm Brazilian. You can tell by my accent, but nothing happened here. But the thing happening on the other side of the world, in the north, in the east, things can impact. Things are all interconnected. These are two examples of regions. We have Forest City and Ashburn. It was on the path of Hurricane Sandy. Luckily, it did not hit us. It was about 50 kilometers away. We did not have the possible impact, which was actually simply destroying the data center, the trees, the poles, everything that connects the data center. If everything goes, you have an island that is useless, or the worst that could happen is reaching the data center. Or suddenly, everything disappears. We could not live with this lack of response. So what could we do? So we could detect and mitigate things. And here, at the time, we not on Facebook. I joined Facebook in 2016, and they were thinking about how Facebook would function if a whole data center was lost. What would happen? Nobody actually knew how to answer this question. So there was an expectation that was created called storm as a reason to be called storm, well, hurricane, etc. And this project, well, several tools were created for this initiative, actually, and to be performed on a large scale. It involved all the engineering department. It was the engineering head who started this project. His name is Jay. He's the engineering VP. That was to make a plan for disaster. Till then, we were on planning for disaster. And one thing is preparing, and the other one is disconnect. And, well, we have to check whether it works. Well, literally blank. There are some acts with little dim lights that you can't see. This is what would happen to you if you lost the whole data center. Facebook may run. Facebook would function in one of these regions. Yeah, that's a question that was asked and that should be answered. So we have hundreds of servers, thousands of systems, and the power consumption in a region corresponds to a city of reasonable size. There are many megawatts. So, and then we thought, well, can we move our users quickly outside the region? And further on, I'll show you what the topology of Facebook is. The user goes to the data center or not, directly does. Do we have enough capacity of servers in other regions to move those users for other regions, or are we making a non-optimal planning, or perhaps terrible? Do we have capacity on the network backbone to reroute the traffic into dozens of other routes to those other data centers of different points that pull this traffic? There were three questions that seemed to be simple. Well, let's do it here, Matt. Well, there's so many servers more. Apparently, we have capacity on the backbone. Everything will work. And most companies, in our understanding, make a very detailed analysis, and at the end, they declare, okay, stamped. Everything is cool. If it happens, no problems. So we decided to do things slightly different because of this. Just a brief question. How many of you in the room have had an experience with hurricanes in your infrastructure? I know I'm asking this question in Brazil. We had a tropical cyclone a few years ago in the southern region of Brazil, but apart from that, I can't remember any event as bad as that in Brazil. Well, Floods. Well, it's a natural disaster. If you've had a flood in your infrastructure, you might have lost another site that is replicating a CDWAM, a tower, a POP, a gust of wind. So you should be prepared for what happens. So it's a tower of that is 50 meters tall. Well, are you going to be a month out? You're going to lose your client. Since we don't have many people that have experienced this, how many of you have suffered from software bug, from the router, Linux, patch, Apache? Well, everybody somehow suffered. Either you've written your software, because every software will have a bug, full stop, or you have your vendor that provides the equipment, the software that evolves and should be corrected every now and then. People prefer not to get a bug or need to correct, of course, but unfortunately it does exist. But assume bugs can be implemented in every data center in our case. And they may cause a list of failures. Imagine it's like a domino. So you have a rollout of fails and it will actually have a domino effect, impacting everything. What are we saying? We should be prepared for natural disasters, and then there's a human factor. We make mistakes, and there's no problem regarding that. The question is, you're admitting you made a mistake and see how you're going to prevent an error from happening again next time. It should be a different mistake, not the same. So our first project lasted 2 years. It's called Sandstorm from 2012 to 2014. The Spark driver was actually Hurricane Sandy. After 2 years of work, we ran the first large-scale test of disaster recovery called Sandstorm in the region of Ashburn. In the morning of the test, Jay, our engineer VP, was talking to the CFO at the time in 2014, and he was very happy and said engineering made a plan for the company, this and that, cool. And he asked a question, made a statement, and said, "You're not thinking about doing this, are you? Really?" This is what the CFO said. And Jay quickly answered, "We made a whole study and previous work. There's only one way we can be sure, and that's to run the test, and we will." We learned a lot with Sandstorm. One funny thing, our main monitoring system was in Ashburn, only Ashburn. It was before the test. It's a simple thing that could have made Facebook to actually have some blind steering. Well, the boat is just moving on and you have no vision whatsoever. So actually everything was off air, out, and there was no impact. And there were no media needs, nobody heard of it, and it was internal, nothing happened, it was successful. In October 2016, so those are the acronyms of the data center. We have Forest City, FRC. Well, the prior notice was reduced. We had 2 years, and that was reduced to 2 days. We have this dice. We made this little dice, and basically Jay would throw it on the table with the representatives from various areas. Well, in 2 days, you just switch it off. And that's what happened. Well, we have a lot of sense of humor in Facebook. Sandstorm, ice storm, thunderstorm, firestorm, sandstorm 2, thunderstorm 2, and firestorm 2. So we ran numerous tests repeatedly, because every test allowed us to eliminate bugs, software bugs. We improved them and helped us know what to do with disaster. And actually, you can only improve your disaster recovery plan after running several tests. You have to continuously seek improvement. In a long time, we involved more software companies. We covered Facebook, Messenger, Instagram, corporate IT, the ticketing system that we have to ensure that, the data center is out, but people in the company can also continue working. And so I'm here to talk about what's next. That's the most important part of my talk.
What can we do after data center? There is a great challenge with data center. Facebook controls from start to end. Data center belongs to Facebook, backbone the same. When you control start to end, it becomes easier to do it. Not necessarily easy, but that is a more controlled type of environment. What's next then? Well, do not throw yourself. Edge is my team, which means edge, and that represents the edge of the network where you guys connect to Facebook. Failures will happen. That is part of internet. Failures will happen. And how can we minimize impact to people? What can we do to mitigate impact to our users? You connect a user to at the end of the pipe, and that user wants to access that specific app. So both sides have to work jointly. That's why we say collaborative internet. We like to automate everything is possible at Facebook. We are not saying that we are going to get rid of human beings, but those type of repeated tasks, there is something wrong with that type of task which can be automated. So think twice when you start doing the same thing every single day or every week. This is a type of task which can be automated and you can save time. Well, I'm running out of time. I don't know if I'll be able to conclude this presentation, but anyhow, Facebook has global and local controller. Global controller is the one which decides where the user is going to for content, POP A, B, or C, the three router for Facebook.com. And the local controller is within that POP, which interface am I going to use to deliver that traffic. There is the BGP factor, a local controller, or the so-called SDN. Everything is done within the Facebook network. Local and global controller at Facebook, you'll be able to find some further information if you'd like to go into details. The whole idea is to mitigate, to solve our software problems and to be highly automated. Steering under failure. How can we move the traffic under failure? We had some improvement in our controller, which is no longer manual. It used to be manual many years ago, and now it reacts under hours, now minutes. So under any failure, users will be mapped somewhere else in order to minimize impact to people. The idea is to solve any resilience problems and to keep a very good maintenance window. What are we doing today? We are working with many ISPs. We are draining, peering off-peak with a low traffic volume. In Brazil, at around 3 to 5 a.m. local time, coordinated time. We are also analyzing real data to see where can Facebook improve if there is any code problem. Well, I have an extra 5 minutes. And we are developing tools and automation to minimize impact to all. We do not want our engineers to interfere manually at 5 a.m. local time when it's a different time in California or in Hong Kong. We do not want to wake up anyone in the middle of the night to do this or that. The human beings' reaction will take a while, so we better have this kind of function automated. What is a drainage peering test? It's a way to test resilience. Peering point in São Paulo, that is a metric. There is another one in Rio de Janeiro. One does not interconnect to the other one. They are single autonomous units. If there is a failure over here, the other one over there can deliver 100% and vice versa, and anywhere else in the world, any other point. Working with you to drain peering slowly, testing functionalities, not peak volume, monitor outcomes, learn from any possible mistake, and to notify peer if we are lacking of prefixes. We are not sending everything. The other one is delivering a more specific prefix to someone who you do not want to get that traffic. This is a type of information that is not observed by many people. Outcomes so far, we have more tooling, automation, improvements, understanding what is the full problem when we lose a card or the peering loses its DW or anything else. We also manage to fix multiple interconnection problems if there was any prefix problem or ISPath, or sometimes there are those who send a private SN, you name it. Next steps. To drain your network, continue automation improvement, pop and caches, and drain at the peak. The POP will fail at the peak. So we need you. You who are here and those who are following us online. There are 4 methods of egress. An ideal design can lose any one of those elements without impacting anyone. Caching, everyone wants to have one. For qualifying networks, There is that tiny number, and qualification depends on region and some other factors, not only traffic. Do not ask us about what your minimum is, because that will not take you anywhere. There is no answer about your minimum. It depends on where you are placed, and so on. Caching supports static content, absorb pics, it supports live streaming. It is in a kind of static dynamic scenario, but it can support video on cache and resilience on cache. Local peering on a certain metro. We had participated at several internet exchange all over the globe. Many IX peering options globally, and keep your peering updated. Keep Nokia's contact. Keep your capacity. Do not say that you have 20 tera. You do not have it. There are those who say they have 20 tera, but we know that does not make any sense. If you are not present at Peering DB, you do not exist to us. When we assess a future site, you have to be at the DB. PNI has nothing to do with internet exchange. That is a jump within the data center. We are between both ISP and Facebook, 10 and 100 giga. Regional peering. São Paulo and Rio is an example of regional peering, or São Paulo, Miami. Traffic or transit. Transit is the last resort unless we don't peer. And used when PNI or IX become full, or you have to get rid of that package. In summary, we want to build the best resilient connectivity ever and help reduce costs. We want to test and find and fix issues, talk to our team. Thank you so much, and sorry for exceeding my time. Thank you, Rodrigo. I'm open to your questions. Well, unfortunately, there is no time for them, but Rodrigo will be available during the rest of the day. A big round of applause to Rodrigo. Our next panel will address safe internet, and we have Alex Castro, Gilberto Zorello, Eduardo Christian, O. Flaherty, and Breno. Can you all please join us here? And Julio Sirota.
Ok, obrigado, Galvão, por apresentar os nossos painelistas.
Thank you for introducing our panelists. I am Zorello, and I am coordinator of the project Safe Internet by NIC.br. Let's update the program. So as I said, we will update the project, Safe Internet. What is this program about? This is a one-year-old program. We'll talk about manners, minimal requirements, IX actions, and status of all associations. Here we have our representatives from Centralis Brasil, Alex Paraggio from the Abranet, and Breno from Abranet. Christian will present the current status in Brazil as well as the international scenario. Minimal requirements for CPEs, Lucimara, and then Julio will talk about next actions. This program was released last year during the IX Fórum 11 with the support of Internet Society, Abranet, Sinditele Brazil, and Brint. And the goal is to support the technical Internet community to reduce denial Internet attacks, to reduce leakage, counterfeit, to reduce vulnerabilities and failures in setting up present elements in the network, and to create a culture of security in the community as a whole. Action plan: awareness of the community by lectures, the design of a manual of best practices, interaction with associations to mitigate problems, to configure CPS, and to implement basic actions supported by manners, filters in IX, and to establish metrics and to follow closely all actions. So let's try to cover all these topics in this panel, in this session. This morning, it was said about the course BCOP, that is a workshop conducted all over IX forums in the country. We had 7 BCOPs already with 257 certified students. This program addresses devices, hardware, lab sessions, best practices, supported by manners. Some tutorial sessions were produced by NIC, and there was a recent one in Rio de Janeiro. Talks are being given around the country during the regional meetings, where associations, they take to Brazil concepts and ideas of the program. A action which has been dealt in this program are technical meetings with the large carriers to align those standards established by manners, notifications which are submitted by the carriers, and spoofing filters which all networks should have, filter of inside and exit, and routing security mapping. That project started last March. We had 725,000 open IP, and today we have 340,000 open IPs, a 50% reduction of open IPs. The program has got feasible returns already. Of those open IPs, a percentage belongs to carriers. We went down from 725,000 adding up large carriers with IPs. And today we have 206,000 to large carriers and 135,000 to ISPs. That is a very significant reduction in this work we are doing with large operators, large carriers. With the ISP, we had just 10% reduction of IPs, thanks to those awareness actions and talks that we are developing together to ISPs. We hope to improve the processes to meet the CERT's requirements and to reduce open IPs. Here we have 4 protocols working with large operators per month. Here, number of IPs in the beginning of the year and how many we have open now. In the beginning of the year, we had around 550,000 and today 37,000. To that protocol, ASN, we see the main improvement. Actions are being taken now together to operators to mitigate problems with SSDP, NTP, and DNS. We have also started a project to develop actions with ISPs. In last October, with Abranet, Internet Sul, Telesul, Abrahost, and Abralut, in a way to discuss what is the best way to attack a problem to the ISPs. That is a very significant amount available in Brazil. We decided then to develop a program of awareness of those ISPs. A site is being built to improve the communication to ISPs. We also have an action together with the industry. CIMET, for CIMET to be able to measure not only the internet, but to check if that network where they are installed, if they are doing spoofing filters or not. With that at CIMET, with that available at CIMAP, we'll have measurement spots throughout the Brazilian network and being able to know which networks still do not have a spoofing filter. And together to carriers, we are trying to improve compliance to the minimal requirements for the CPEs. And we are also work with the industry in that manner. So we have these are our actions at the mutually agreed norms for routing security. And we want to analyze the traffic that gets in and gets out of the network to set up CEPs so they do not they are not open. We should have some actions to apply filters to filter traffic to those open IPs. And as I said, we are implementing the BCP 38 at CIMET. Those equipments, they will be available at the manufacturing site. You can download that software and you may perform quality network measures. Ideally, these devices will leave the plant with that functionality implemented. Well, this is the program which I would like to present just in time. Very good then. Now I'd like to give the floor to Christian. Thank you.
Boa tarde. Pido disculpas, no voy a hablar en portugués. Portugués es horrible. Voy a intentar hablar español bien despacio y divagar. Y voy a hablar de manners que es la iniciativa que Gilberto explicó al comienzo, que era una de las acciones. Es una iniciativa de la comunidad de Internet para tratar de reducir el impacto que tiene en el ruteo, que tiene en el servicio de Internet de ustedes, por malas configuraciones de otras redes, ¿no? Ustedes cuando configuran...
For poor configurations of other networks, when you set up your autonomous system, you may impact the service on other networks, and other networks, when they do things poorly, they may impact the service to users. And well, we have problems happening all the time. It's the BGP works, how it works, where we announce, and this is what comes out of our network, can affect the service of any network. And that's a commitment amongst everyone to set up things appropriately. All the time, we have incidents happening on the internet due to these poor setups between internet operators or carriers. They discussed the problem, and they agreed on the fact that things that are the most important to make on the networks, to do in our companies, that helps the internet to be safer. First, it is related to when prefixes are taken and you announce these hijackings of directions and of addresses. Well, they are actually impacted in the service, so for spams, for attacks, or to do any kind of activities that attackers want to do. The other times, the problems occur due to poor configuration or setups, and we distribute something incorrect, and we announce a block or on another for some configurations that we are making that have an impact outside our autonomous system, and these escapes of routes affect the service of other ISP. And the other thing related to route that affects a lot or impacts a lot the DDoS, and these attacks happen because we let packets to leave our networks with a modified source address. So we ask all stakeholders to set up things correctly so that this does not impact the service of other networks. Our setups affect other networks, and the service of our network is impacted by what we set up. The only way is committing ourselves amongst all ourselves. That's why we have this routing manifest, and we show publicly and commit ourselves that we comply with the actions that we request through manners. As I said, basically 4 requests. We ask at all the BGP sessions with neighbors set up filters so that do not apprehend things that should not apprehend. In all sessions, you should set up filters of autonomous systems of prefixes. You should have techniques to avoid spoofing, anti-spoofing techniques, changing source IP in the packets. You can do it RPF, any kind of functionality that we have today in routers, or configuring the access list, or however you feel comfortable. Place correctly contact information in PDB in places where this information can be collected, so that if a network, an ISP has a problem with their configuration or setup, they can contact you directly. And make sure you inform what your routing policy is and how your prefixes should be announced. If you have IP addresses in an autonomous system, this relation the source of the IP address should be public somewhere. In addition, we have a similar program for IXPs where we ask for similar ones. One is to filter with the IXP filtering. The other one is related to promoting manners to members, to those connected in the traffic exchange points. So have protection on the switch that makes the connections with all providers or ISPs. Have ways of contacting all the providers. Have some diagnosis tool like looking glass. So diagnosis tools. You can verify whether you are complying with manners before you complete the form. You can verify from your autonomous systems if there have been incorrect notices or if there have been part or they were part of some kind of deviation of route, some hijacking, or were incorrectly forwarded, or if there was the generation of packets with changed source IP. And then we have tools that can verify this, and it can also verify if somebody else verified your network and verify the changed IP address, the source address, and well, you can also have PRADB, and also for self-evaluation, we have Carlos Martinez and Freda to talk about the RPQA in Brazil to show routing information can IRR, IDD, or RIPE, so showing that your autonomous system can announce these prefixes. Well, what tools do we have available for you?
Cumplir con manners. Hay unos manuales.
To comply with manners, we have some manuals, so you access the website. We have a training lab that will be shortly available for courses and providing information. We're going to show information on autonomous systems involved in certain incidents so that if any of you are taking part of some global incidents can actually see whom you've impacted and take action for correction and tutorials. Sorry for the typos. We have MicroTik, Juniper, and main providers. So we can access this page and find all kinds of information. I am here more than anything else to answer questions, to get suggestions. This is a project that is a community project. So at ISOC, we try to promote things that are good for the Internet. I believe this is very good for the Internet, and this is why we are actually publicizing it. So any changes, suggestions, we do hope to receive them from the community. You add things or change things, or you can help us publicize it. It would be very good. Well, thank you very much. Christian, thank you very much for your explanation on manners. Lucimara, can you make a presentation on minimum requirements for the acquisition of BCPS? My name is Lucimara. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about an initiative that was born in a group of carriers of Latin America, like NOCOP, to develop a BCOP. It's not the same as he mentioned before. It's a training part that NIC is providing in best network operations practices. The acronym means to say that this is best current operational practices for network services. Here I'm talking about a best practices document that was born within the Latin American community.
Inicialmente, na verdade, veio
It came with the establishment of a work group, the Latin American and Caribbean Anti-Abuse Working Group, the LAC WG. It was born in 2017, February, as a joint initiative, LAC-NOG, MOG, an American association of companies in the industry that also have aim at combating the poor use of the internet, and LACNIC. The goal of these groups, LAC, WG, is to develop an anti-abuse community in Latin America, and the other one is fostering the development of recommendations that are anti-abuse and best operating practices for this community. Many times we see good practices, best practices born abroad that do not reflect Latin America or Latin American reality. We had the first meeting of this group in Iguazu Falls in May 2017. It was LACNIC 2017. Sorry for the typo there. And in October 2017, LACNIC 2017, LACNOG 2017, the community started developing security issues at CP. It's that device that operators or carriers put in the homes of users that they can buy, that they use to connect to the network of the ISPs. So that's what allows you to connect to the ISPs. These issues have great native security issues. It does not have active services that are not needed. The setups are too open and standard passwords that everybody knows, and it makes it easy for an attacker to go into the equipment and install malware and attack the networks. All of this was discussed by the community in this meeting of October 2017. And then one of the proposals that came up was precisely a document that would have purchase requirements. The consumer market should have a push to the industry, to equipment producers or manufacturers, so that they would have safer products by design and by default. And that was when we had the first volunteers to draft the document. So that's when, in April 2018, we launched the first draft for comments of the community. In May, Panama, we had the first live meeting to discuss the document draft 1, and that was really cool. We had a lot of people taking part. We received a lot of comments and feedbacks to the extent that it was not possible to close the meeting with the document, and we had to extend it. And in June, we had a virtual meeting, a conference call with more participants, and we were able to get more feedback. And still in June, we launched draft 2. And we decided on this draft 2 to launch it only in English. We had initially a version in Portuguese and one in English, and it was impossible to cope with both languages. So we decided to keep just one language, the English version, and we had at the same time, we had the dissemination, the publicization of the safe internet in Brazil, in contact with ISPs and companies so that they could send and provide us feedback. We had carriers like Claronet, and we continued our project. In September, we launched draft 3 for comments. We also had a live meeting at LACNIC 30 in Rosario, LACNOG 2018. And then we opened up for a period of comments that was quite long, much longer than we expected initially, because we started receiving or having the participation of various external contributors. They were contributing a great deal. Participants like Comcast from the US, CERT Coordination Center in the U.S., or the Carnegie Mellon University. John Brown, our speaker for tomorrow, our keynote, contributed a lot. So we extended the time for comments to be able to receive a lot of information. In December 2018, now this week, actually, we launched draft 4 of this document. We had a last call at the BCRP list. We actually forwarded the document for a technical review by MOG, that is fostering the development of the group in Latin America. And they will run a technical review by their technical committee and the senior advisors in the industry in the U.S. And once it goes through the technical review there, they intend to launch the document co-branded with LACNOG, that would be COP LACNOG and a best practice of MOGs from the U.S. And what do we foresee in terms of the development of these activities? Once it's gone to the technical committee of MOG, we've already received some feedback. And in 2019, we'll have the next meeting at MOG in February to 2019, the 45th meeting, general meeting. Will be there to discuss comments and the final version they are revising, and the idea is to get to the final version of the document and then proceed to the translation into Portuguese and Spanish and make it available to Latin America as a whole. This is more or less the structure of the document today. And we have the explanation of all the security involved in the CPs. That's a comment I forgot to mention in the beginning. When we had our second meeting, when this topic came up, one of the participants said the following that really struck me. I remember that until today. Once I put a CPE on the network in less than 15 minutes, it's no longer mine. It's being hacked. It's in the hands of somebody else. So all these problems are explained in the executive summary, and then we have terminology, what we mean by certain terms on the text. And then we start with the requirements, general requirements, what should be provided by the vendor, software security requirements that they should comply, the need to have an update and management requirements that many people don't have, functional requirements, what should function and should not, initial configuration requirements, what should be enabled by default or manufacturer default so that it's not open to abuse, vendor requirements, and the manufacturer, it should have a mechanism, especially a mechanism so that they can receive feedback regarding vulnerabilities that are found, how we can contact the vendor, how long they're going to provide support to the equipment, so on and so forth. And acknowledgements and informative references and an annex, which is a complete table of all the requirements, what is expected, what is compulsory that they should deliver, what is the default product, what should be followed. And lastly, if somebody wants to take part in this process, the document is on the link. It's being developed on Google Docs. It's a BCOP list, a BCOP at lacnog.org, how you can be part of it. And on the bottom, you have my contact details. If you wish to have further information and want to talk further, you have my contact, and I'll be here throughout the week, and you can talk to me. On Friday, we'll have a complete talk on BCOP and the GTS program. I'm not going to say much more now. I have no time, and the talk will be on Friday. Thank you.
Obrigado, Lucimara, pela explanação. Júlio, se puder dar status aí.
Can you now please update us on IX?
Bom, em relação à parte de segurança, né,
As to security for IX router services and what manners standards are for IX, out of that 5 items list presented by Chris, we have 4 of them already implemented, considering all activities that we perform, such as promoting manners throughout the community and how we incentivize its deployment. We still had, though, to validate route servers security. With that in mind, we discussed internally and published a document with all these resolutions, requirements, and actions to take. That has been submitted for hearing. We had 2 phases for comments until we wrote down the final release. That took around 4 months to be concluded. Main objectives of this document, they are deployed into 4 important aspects, such as not accepting bug-ons, and most of those validations, they had been implemented before at our routers servers. We still have to consider the source ads validations, where 3 different databases are being proposed: RR data and RPQI. Regarding routing policies, we are trying to understand what IS stubling is. That is an autonomous system directly connected to IXBR. To this IS, it's much easier to verify connection and routing. Another possible option is to validate IS7. We are also considering the creation of black hole to ISNs, the stub ISNs. All actions were listed according to 4 different types, considering duration, short, middle, and long, 12 to 18 months to the long period. And for those received ads, for anyone, communities will be inserted for each one of the ads, informing validation results. There is a very simple flowchart to be followed there. I believe you won't be able to read anything in this slide, but anyhow, that has already been implemented. And as I said this morning, the router services migrations, they started being validated since the very beginning. We have, for instance, prefix validations, Brazilian prefixes. Now he's correcting himself. ISNs for prefix validation, prefix bogons, and ISNs. We have a small number of invalid ads, a maximum of 200 of them. Within this new policy, we tick ads, but they are just shown in the thin glass web. as they are valid, the prefixes with some typos, they are not exported, but rather dropped in the entrance.
Aí a gente tem a validação usando a base de dados do registro BR, tá?
BR Registry Validation Database. Today, the registry publishes in a public FTP area a file with all necessary information to carry out validation of the ASs and Brazilian addresses blocks. Around 740 prefixes which are stamped as being invalid. But before we made filters able to drop immediately and prevent further export, we double-checked and we realized that some adjustments were necessary at the base of the registry. Some of those adjustments had been made. We still have some issues with the legacy addresses blocks, things which date from the very beginning of Internet, encompassing global ISs. Let's say the company has a IS abroad and another one in Brazil. So some further adjustments have to be refined and synchronized to be able to act fully without dropping these advertisements. We also have RPKI validation and a significant number of invalids. Today, if you access the Looking Glass web, there are some new communities informing if that block is valid or not. This, for instance, is an invalid one. This is a block submitted to a different public education entity. So some adjustments are required to avoid this type of mistake. Future steps. We still have to analyze the registry database. We might solve that by next week, the latest. We will also release an update of the document defining the XBR communities, including those new communities which were part of the security process. Such a document will be published both in Portuguese and English, and afterwards a notification will be submitted to all ASNs with results invalid. So ASs will have time for corrections. Right after that, filters activations. There is no fixed date for that yet, but we guess that will happen by the end of January next year. We also would like to have a new version of the Looking Glass web, the one used and developed by the German team that's called Alice. And that's a very interesting one with some appropriated tools to visualize that community of ads validations. As to deadlines, our priority is to use the database and RPKI. The RR and SSAT validation, we are still going with that. That is being implemented, but not 100% approved, so it's not released yet. Thank you, Julio, for your explanations. We still have 20 minutes left. and you are all invited to talk about the importance of this program to those companies which are being represented here today. Well, Alex, you are the first. You look like you are feeling to speak. Good afternoon. I am Alexander Castro. I work for Sindilet Brazil, which is a company that represents the largest carriers in Brazil, the telcos in Brazil. The Internet Civil Framework supports security, agility of the network, which should be measured by the standards and respecting best practices. This is part of the framework and is our responsibility to comply with that. App providers, access providers, connection providers, vendors, suppliers, users, and NIC.br, which manages all PPTs. It's clear that all telcos are willing to participate voluntarily to this process to exchange information and to learn more and to compete for vulnerability, some solutions, alternative solutions to mitigate artificial traffic, not only in our network but in third-party networks. Providers responsible for multimedia communication, mobile and fixed broadband, they are always working to improve their networks, being that transportation, access, and also terminal equipments. But companies, they have different sizes, topologies, they have several million elements of a network. They have different business proposals. There are those who supply equipment to users, others do not. And for all of these reasons, our company understood that should perform in an individualized way together with NIC.br. During the development of our program, we noticed that attacks, denied attacks, they are increasing. And most solutions to avoid them or to minimize its effects, they go through filters and traffic blocks. And we call them artificial traffic or malicious traffic. During the whole framework discussion process, we had always advocated for the fact that companies should feel free to manage their networks and to ensure the civil internet framework, where we would feel free to monitor and to act towards our problems to guarantee network stabilities. And this discussion is very timely in a technical group like this one, where choices are made jointly to guarantee a political security to our sector. And a good example of that was the block of Port 25, where together with CGI, we managed to reduce it drastically and to improve the country's image in relation to the number of spans. And we also understand that the main challenge we have to face to change the digital transformation, which is taking place all over, is your ability to convey security and trust to users and providers regarding the safety of our networks. A robust network is a key issue to foster our development and to improve online services and to make all of those available to the society as a whole. With that, we concluded our participation at this project, participating at bilateral meetings, NIC.br plus another association like NIC.br, Claro, Intel, Claro with the Telefonica, NIC with Agar, NIC with TIM, NIC.br always participating at all these meetings with different telcos. After all meetings, NIC.br present some reports, and the goal is to find telco vulnerabilities. All participants, they get that material, they perform internal tests, they identify vulnerabilities, and based on those actions, which are discussed at the bilateral meetings, some actions are taken to mitigate and to minimize the problems, such as open IPs of the protocol SNP, where we reached 65% reduction. For other protocols, we are still working on that, as we understand that that requires a continuous and long-lasting commitment. We hope we can keep on working together with NIC.br for a long period of time. We had selected experts on network safety. We identify some focal points. We included carriers. Carriers, they are divided in 4 groups. One which is in charge for incidents on computer, another one for CPRs, another one for access network, and the 4th one addresses backbones. During these meetings, we had to understand what were those tools used by NIC.br for presenting those numbers to telcos, and how was all that information achieved. We also discussed during the meetings all the requirements addressed by the CPRs. We have to define on a minimum set of requirements which will be charged later on during the Anatel 1 and 2 certification process, and some other considerations that we have to do during the CPRs to guarantee the trust of devices and also to get rid of those unnecessary services which are still active by default, and unfortunately they are used and they represent a vulnerability. Center Brazil has a macro participation. We let carriers discuss technical issues among themselves, and anytime we need to interfere, maybe because the process is going too slow or maybe because the adoption rate of actions are low, Center Brazil acts together at the company's level to guarantee the proper focus and care to the process. And just to close, a final comment. The telecom sector has also advocated for self-regulation. And this project somehow is a way to self-regulate ourselves. We are here then without involvement of a regulatory agency, neither the state involvement, but just NIC.br together with other companies, identifying solutions, optimizing solutions, and to minimize attacks, which are responsible maybe to knock down a company, to shut down services, and that can be very negative to companies. I'll be available throughout the rest of the day at your disposal. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. The self-regulatory concept is very key. in this project. There is a joint work among all companies to improve internet safety. Anyone else? Paraggio or Breno? Hello, good afternoon. Different from large telcos, our ISPs has no specific security group or a technical team to defend us from attacks or to be ready to carry out all necessary setups. It's up to us to bring awareness, and this is what we have been doing. And since that task force has started, we succeeded in convincing our users to throw to rubbish the emails, their emails, the CSERT emails. Most of them are being read now. And a second achievement has to do with identification of problems, and those problems are being treated. Now we had a drop of 10%, 134,000 IPs with a problem that is a problem which can be treated, and Abranet is available and willing to help even more. Internally, we have a working group where this group of people will talk to providers, will try to identify them by consultants to understand which are the ASs with problems.
And address these incidents in a free way for the time being. And if it's a more impactful incident, a problem that will persist, that persists for a long time, address it, well, paying consultant to resolve it. Some people work, work for all of us. I'm just joining the group now, and I'm sure we will have a lot of work ahead, and this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. Breno, thank you very much. And obviously, service to users is very important to mitigate these problems that arise on the network. Just to add, I had the opportunity of talking to two contributors that are here that are in security, and I actually verified all the emails from search. 100% that arrive to us are from corporate clients that are the very end, that they took the initiative in the company that opened up a ticket of the incident and talked to the subscribers at the end to try to resolve there. And the ticket is not closed whilst the incident is not resolved. So this is an attitude that was taken by the company, but can be replicated to all associates, no doubt. Very good. Paraju. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eduardo Paraju, representing Abranet here. As people have mentioned or talked a lot about this topic, this initiative to us has been quite important. We know there are various ISPs suffering a lot from DDoS attacks, and these actions contribute to facilitate and improve the non-propagation of attacks. I believe the main message, as Breno made it clear, and Alex as well, in the case of carriers, is tries to close the door so that these devices are not used to propagate or reflect attacks generated on the Brazilian internet. We know a lot of people suffer from this kind of problem in Brazil, from a very small ISP that is providing access to their region, to a large carrier that suffers a lot. And what happens is, as people commented, the volume of attacks increases. Before, we talked about attacks of 1 gig, 2 gig. Now we see attacks of 50, 60, 70 gigs. And it can increase 300, 500 gig. So people lost a lot of money on Bitcoin, and they're spending that money to attack others. So go there. So it's very important. And Roberto, the last meeting we had, with the presence of various others, associations, Abranet was there, and there were people from Telesul, network, internet, so about hosting. And the idea is for us to get within the project to create some manuals, some handbooks, how can I configure my MikroTik for this filter, the Juniper, my Cisco. So the idea is for us to make things as easy as possible for the ISPs, as we did in the beginning of IX to configure BGPs. And we know there are a lot of people coming into the market, and there is a lot of lack of knowledge. The other direction we defined at the meeting is to have consultants. We know there are lots of consultants in the network when the ISPs are starting, help them set up and build their network. And these are the people we want to have closer to this work so that they can replicate information. We know there is a lot of work at the very end to be performed, and these consultants we have our arms open to be able to have these people with us, working with us, so that the information can reach the very end to the small ISPs. It's a type of work that involves the community as a whole, not just the large, mid-sized, or small carriers and ISPs. We have to work together to try to reduce the vulnerability we've seen of IPs that are, in fact, open IPs that are turned remote, used on the Brazilian internet, that impact the service providers, the users receiving services, be it corporate or residential, and we need to proceed with it. It's not an easy thing. To disseminate this information is not easy. Abranet, Print, Abamut, and all the other associations, Internet so have taken that to their users so that we spread knowledge. We hope that for next year we have some stages of the plan that we intend to perform, and this start circulating to all so that we can implement it. And obviously, the collaboration of the community with suggestions. Roberto is responsible for this within NIC.br. And if the community has suggestions, remarks, and things that they can add, nobody knows it all, right? So perhaps there's an idea that somebody in the community can share with us that it can be very effective. And this makes sense, total sense to us. Thank you. Thank you, Parajo. The idea of this panel was to combine all the associations that show the community as to how we are united towards this program to move on with actions to improve the internet as a whole. So I've been talking this morning with Christian, and we have the support of Internet Society to try to develop materials to improve the information for this program. We have a little time left. If anybody has any questions, we are happy to entertain them. Microphone? Well, let's have the microphone over there, please.
Boa tarde a todos. Meu nome é Robson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robson Lima, as Parajo mentioned. Now I'm the CEO of Abranet. Well, actually, I'd like to mention, Parajo actually took some words from my mouth. Well, perhaps we should have an email. We should create an email to have a list of for our associates. What Breno mentioned is quite important. Not only that, but it's also been in the voting of LACNIC. Nobody paid attention to that. They didn't even know why. So much so that when we started this large movement, Abranet, Abramut, we had a vote with our colleagues, Evandro Varonil, one of the most significant votes, or as far as I know, for the short period I have been around this work, actually helped people pay attention to the emails, not simply put in the trash or leave it as spam. So I'd like to start with this, and as Parajo mentioned, to have some handbooks, things for us to post. I do that a lot on our groups. On WhatsApp, we have over 250 ISPs. I have about 30 groups we take part throughout Brazil. So these posts are very important, because after the meeting we had, we took part at the panel led by Gilberto and Parajo. Man, what I've seen in terms of comments in the groups has been frightening, incredible. Well, I had never paid attention to it. Sometimes we are attacked by our ISP. We don't know what it is. We think it's a link that is down, WhatsApp that stopped, Facebook. And actually, what I see comments talking about Bendito, I think it was David Marconi talked about that made that into a business. The DDoSs, the guy was discovering even passwords for emails and was attacking the ISP. You pay the invoice on time and you have it on this. And so I wanted to create the list, and I actually talked about the post on a WhatsApp group, and this is what moves things around, to be always positioning to them, to us as representatives, ISPs like Breno, Palanjo, and the others. We perform in this action, and I've seen this actually has had results. I wanted to get your emails, and we put that on the list, on a discussion list that we have for emails. Any novelties from you, that's actually sent automatically to all members in Brazil. So I think this will certainly help. With another post that Parajo gave the idea. So it's important to disseminate that and try to reduce even further this kind of problem. We have to use technology to disseminate that. If they use that to attack, let's use it to defend ourselves. So the point that I'd like to mention is to create this line not only amongst our associates and the associates and members of other associations, because you go directly to their list. When they go to the list, they will consider that an important topic. They will think it's an important topic. So that's a suggestion I'd like to make, so that we sort of close in the control even further. To improve communications is certainly what we need. Are there any more questions? If not, we can close. Thank you very much to our panel members, and thank you all very much. To proceed and move on with our presentations, I'd like to invite Michael from Extreme Networks to make a presentation on transport, network requirements, and architecture for 5G. Michael, please.
Presentation is done remotely? What if what you see on the screen now is a hologram? What if actually I'm part of this conference using AR, VR, stuff like that? Is this science fiction? Okay, so my name is Michael Holmberg. I do come from Extreme Networks, and what I'm actually going to talk about is the the transport network architecture, as well as requirements for 5G. So kind of the intro I gave you is, that's going to be reality at a given time once you start to get into 5G. So I'm going to spend like the next 25, 30 minutes talking about the requirements for 5G. I guess a lot of you guys heard about 5G. A lot of you guys heard about, the kind of challenge it's going to put, because you are going to start to talk about, self-driven cars. You're going to start to talk about different new applications, which obviously at the end of the day is going to put some requirements on the network itself. So with that said, let's actually start this journey with taking a, step back. So basically looking at the, metro networks a couple of years back, what was the key thing? You basically had, more dynamics at the access, and obviously less dynamics in the core network. Now, from a feature function point of view, obviously this used to be like layer 0 to layer 3. And you started to look at things like SDN, flow-based. You started to look at applications more and more cloud-based. So that was like back then. So if we actually move ahead, so I'm going to spend like 2 minutes on a video for you guys. This is just to build a foundation for what I'm going to talk about. I guess for a lot of you, this is not really new stuff. I think this is just a good kind of recap of 5G. Can we get the video rolling? I can actually get with the clicker. Sorry for that. A short technical break, I guess. Yeah, it's embedded. Yeah. It's embedded. Okay, so sorry for that, guys. So instead of the video, let me kind of walk you through the same thing. The intent of the video was just to show you, in a nutshell, 5G. But I guess, doing it with slides is basically the same thing. So, as I said, if we kind of look at 4G, what we have today, you look at, latency requirements like 10 milliseconds, which is kind of huge, right? If you start to look at 5G latency requirements, you talk about sub 1 millisecond, microseconds. Why is this? This is due to the new applications. What are the applications? As you know, autonomous cars, self-driving cars, remote surgery, things like that. So it's truly putting new demands on the network itself, because at the end of the day, you still have a network in place somewhere, right, for the transport. And another thing is bandwidth. So think of this, if I'm actually able to get like 10 gig on a handheld compared to what you have today, I can get like 4K video on my handheld. So, to build up the story more and more, obviously this is going to put a lot of requirements on your network infrastructure. So, a few use cases here. Obviously, looking at mission-critical networks, that's one use case. Today, you have the Tetra networks, you have the P25 networks, mission-critical networks. 5G is thought of actually being the new technology for those networks as well, with things like push-to-talk, with things like sensors, kind of understanding if I'm about to crash, to get emergency people on site, all that stuff. You have a high-definition video, you have a bunch of new applications. And then looking at the next one, IoT. We all love IoT, right? And IoT is massive. I mean, if you start to look at IoT, today you have your fridge is connected fridge is connected, your coffee maker is connected, your sensors connected, basically everything. So here's the thing. So some surveys actually say that by 2024, you are going to have like 15 billion IoT devices, 15 billion, which of 4 billion is going to be mobile connected. By the same year, 2024, you're going to have 1.6 billion 5G subscribers. Now, why am I going through all of this stuff? Due to the fact that at the end of the day, you still have a network in place. Right, so if you look at the two other ones, you had mobile broadband. Now, let me throw out a question here. If I have 10 gig on my handheld, the speed, if you now look at, the fixed broadband, how many of you have 10 gig home? Not that many, I guess. If I can actually have, mobile 10 gig broadband, that's a complete new interesting application as well. So I think you kind of get the picture here, what I'm talking about. as said, you see 10 times increase in the bandwidth from 4G to 5G. And I talk about the bandwidth on the physical device, my handheld. You see, new kind of use cases come into play. Not only the consumers anymore. You go into logistics, you go into transport, you go into healthcare, you go into, as said, a bunch of new applications. I'm not going to read out the complete slide, but I just want to build out a picture here that you understand that, a lot of new things are coming along with 5G. And then you go into the MNOs, the mobile network operators, you do business to consumer, you do business to business. You have different models, so to speak. So, 5G, ignore kind of the wireless or the radio parts. What I want to focus on is on the two left-hand side squares, which is basically network slicing together with low latency networks. Now, going back again saying that low latency, if I have a self-driving car, I need to have truly low latency, right? Which means I need to support it in some way in my core network as well, in my fixed network, because that's where I'm going to end up basically pushing everything. And here's a key thing with 5G. 5G is cloud native, which means that all of the services are moved into the cloud. And guess what? I need to have a network in place to get to the cloud. So, as said, it's cloud native. Now, latency being one thing. The other thing is that, as I kind of, had as an example public safety networks, or, remote surgery, or autonomous cars. I can't really have those applications competing with me as a consumer looking at 4K video, looking at, some stuff on the net, which means that I actually go into something called network slicing. Now, what is network slicing? So it's basically a way of providing communication for different applications based on the 5G architecture you have. So looking at the topology, how flexible it is. So as a recap, as I said, the RAN, the radio access network, used to be like hardware-based everything, right? Now with 5G, as said, this is cloud native, which means that I have a minority of the physical functions out at my radio access part, on my radio towers. The rest of the services, the intelligence is actually in the cloud. Everything is virtualized. To add to that one, NFV, SDN, once again, it's virtualized, right? You have your network function virtualization with, things like virtualized firewalls, load balancers, all of that stuff resides somewhere in the cloud. Then you go into kind of starting to look at the cloud. Now I have something called the MEC, which is the mobile edge cloud or the multi-access edge cloud, which basically means that I'm starting to throw more stuff out to the edge, to the access from an intelligence point of view. Now, on the previous slide, you saw kind of TCP optimization as well, which kind of raises a question that is IP truly, the protocol to use? So there are some thoughts of going into something called ICN, which is more like information-centric networking, which basically goes hand in hand with the MEC, the mobile edge cloud, that you start to put more intelligence, more stuff out to the cloud. You spread it through the cloud. But at the end of the day, you still have a network in place here. So another thing here on 5G, you split the control and the user plane, which is basically you have a separate data plane and a separate control plane. So that's kind of building the picture. And still, as said, you have a core network in place. You still have a packet network somewhere to actually get me from the RAN, get me from the virtualized or the radio environment all the way into my virtual services within the cloud somewhere. So to kind of walk you through network slicing in 2 minutes on a high level. think of this as you have your orchestration layer, you have your RAN orchestration, basically your radio access network orchestration. You have your transport network orchestration, and you have your core network orchestration. So basically orchestration of everything, right? Then you get into your network slicing part being the services. Now you might actually have a given enterprise customer who is using one network slice for his services, enterprise services. Then on top of that one, you have another network slice, which is basically for my RAN network. As I said, if you go into a C-RAN, being a cloud RAN, you have a different network slice for that one. What I'm trying to make a point on here is that you can't compete on the bandwidth on basically what you have in a normal core infrastructure today for different applications. You need to have some intelligence in place. Now, well, somebody could ask, define network slicing. What is it? It could be a VLAN, it could be a VXLAN tunnel, it could be some kind of a virtual connection, physical connection, you name it. It's not really defined yet. The point being is that you need to be able to separate between different traffic classes, because some of the traffic might have requirement for ultra low latency, stuff like that. So, as I said, you then have multiple slices, basically for different functions. You might have your 2G, 3G, 4G transport, that's a slice. You might have your Wi-Fi offload. You might have different network slices for different functions or services within the 5G architecture. So basically, this obviously puts some requirements as I kind of walk you through, saying that I need to be able to make sure that if I have a given low latency application, I need to orchestrate that in the right way with policies, with different things on the service layer here. Okay, so 5G transport is more than just a necessary cost. It's truly an architecture, right? But it's an architecture that is focusing on the future. We don't even have a clue of all the applications we are going to see here, right? It's going to be a bunch of new applications coming out with this one. And this is part of the universal edge. As said, you have SDN in the picture, you have your packet optical network, you have still a transport network in place here. So let's spend a few minutes on this one. So this shows you now, I'm kind of drilling into the architecture itself from a network point of view. What this shows you is the 4G compared to the 5G. Now, if you look at the details, on the 4G, you basically have your radio head, you have your base unit, and then you go back to your mobile, basically, services. What you see is you have a backhaul and a front haul service. This is a matter of networking, right? And you can see the latencies that's basically given for the 4G. Now, if you compare to the 5G, as said, you start to virtualize things, which means that you have a radio unit, you have an RU, you have a DU, which is a digital unit, and then you go into a CU. Define a CU. CU is actually an Ethernet switch. And then you go into your core, which is your packet core, which is your backbone, basically. So with that said, as you can see, and as I was mentioning, the latency requirements are pretty heavy here. Not only that one, but the interesting thing, if you look at the synchronization, for 4G, it's GPS. For 5G, we talk about TSN, or basically PTP, and SYNC. Now, this raises a question due to the fact that I need to transport synchronization. I need to transport it through my network. And as I mentioned, everything is cloud-based. I need to make sure that I get from end to end with a sync. So TSN, what is it? It's part of the 802.1q family. It's defined as provide deterministic messaging on standard Ethernet networks. So to put that into some context, I'll skip over this one. The To put that into some context, this is a recap of basically the needs you have from a network point of view. What you see is here the same broken out to the different part, the front haul, the mid haul, and the back haul. And as said, you see the technologies you use here, front haul TSN, which is the sync part, could be WDM, active or passive, dedicated fiber. For the mid haul, you go into OTN, WDM, you go into low latency Ethernet. Keep in mind, low latency Ethernet. And then the backhaul is kind of the carrier Ethernet that you have today. So another thing is, everything is model driven. So you actually start to go into automation, massive scale automation. And kind of taking a step back here, I didn't talk anything about the radio part, but what you basically are going to start to see is, picocells, microcells, small cells. You're going to see, a huge proliferation of antennas, of basic base stations, because you need to have 100% coverage. You need to provide, as we've been discussing, the 5G requirements here, which basically means that I need to be able to configure all that stuff in some way. Hence, you go into young models, data models together with netconf. And they basically have something called the SON, which is kind of a way of self-organizing networks, which basically is an automation providing automated tasks to configure all this on the RAN side. This is just a model of that one. What I truly like on this slide is if you look at the red square, saying that with the full mesh packet network architecture, cross-domain control will allow operators to support end-to-end services. Cross-domain, which means that we do not talk anymore only of a network. We talk cross-domain, network, applications, services, everything. So, taking a step back, I talked about PTP and sync key. Now, here's a challenge. Sync key is a hardware-based sync, which means that if I'm going to provide sync key synchronization, I need to have each and every device understanding sync key. It's hardware-based. Now, as we all realize, that's not optimal, because you're not going to have an end-to-end network providing hardware sync. Hence, you go into PTP or precision time protocol defined by 1588v2, which is the same thing packet-based, which means that you're basically going to put a timestamp within your packet in some way, which basically means that you have a clock architecture, or hierarchy actually, where you would have a master clock and slave clocks. All of the slave clocks would actually adjust to the master clock, and basically saying that you need to have a capability within Ethernet to actually timestamp a packet, going from Ethernet's nature being connectionless into basically timestamping something, which means that I need to understand and timestamp my traffic to get synchronization done. And this kind of goes back again to my use cases I defined with truly, mission-critical applications, with new applications we are going to see, which do have a huge demand for things like that. I'm not going to go through this slide. This kind of just shows you PTP, what it does. It's basically a way of how you start with send your time, you basically acknowledge your time, and eventually I know what is the skew on the time, and I'm going to correct my PTP field in my Ethernet header to basically be able to cope with that time. So, with that said, obviously I do come from extreme networks, so I need to kind of build a picture here for you guys that the stuff I talked about, the synchronization, we do have products supporting that. And obviously, fact being is that if you looked at the 5G architecture I was showing, the DU is the Ethernet switch. You need to provide synchronization on those ones. We have different platforms supporting functions like that. Now, what I actually want to throw into the picture is the automation. And as I said, it's well defined for 5G, the cross-domain automation. guess what? We actually see the same thing happening in enterprise network, in data center networks, and so on and so forth. So what the basically picture shows you is automation in steps. Nobody wants to go from CLI to cross-domain automation with all the workflows, all that stuff. So what happens is that you start small. You might start to automate your network infrastructure, talking about say a close fabric. You automate that close fabric. Next step is that you bring into the picture some more automation tools like Puppet, Chef, Ansible. You provide APIs with RESTful APIs, so on and so forth. And then eventually you go into cross-domain orchestration, which we tend to think being, truly the thing due to the fact that you get into a scenario where you have not only the network anymore, but you have basically applications as well as webhooks to be able to do something based on an event. What we use is Stackstorm as the engine. It's something called the Extreme Workflow Composer. But basically to kind of build a picture for you in 1 minute, what you'll have is think of a network where I actually have something triggering an event, an SNMP trap. Based on that SNMP trap, what I want to do is try to remediate my network, try to re-enable that port, for instance. I also want to have webhooks into applications, one being a Slack channel for my NOC. The other one might be a webhook into an application, being Splunk or being anything, I might want to open a trouble ticket in my trouble ticket system. So this is kind of the automation, the cross-domain automation as such. And as said, this kind of falls from the 5G all the way into the enterprise and the data centers. And we do have some automation suites for fabrics, for tenant provisioning, so on and so forth. So with that said, I have 1 minute to go, and that's basically showing you the 5G architecture on a high level. Now, my key message of these 30 minutes is keep in mind that you still have your core network, you still have your network in place. Obviously, your demands for that given network has changed and will change with 5G. Not only from the synchronization part, but also from a bandwidth-hungry application point of view. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Agora nós vamos...
Next, we have a break, coffee break, and please be back at 4:30. Thank you. Shall we now proceed to the last session of today before the beer? I'd like to invite Anahi from Telegeography, and she will address a tile of prices Latin America versus the rest of the world.
Hello, everybody. I know like half of the room is outside enjoying their coffee, but you guys are super lucky.
Eu sei que metade da sala ainda está fora, né, no cafezinho, mas agradeço a vocês que estão aqui.
For the invitation to be here.
Agradeço o NIC.br pelo convite de estar aqui hoje com todos. Eu sou a Anaí Rebata, da Telegeography. Nós somos uma empresa de pesquisa de mercado baseado em Washington, D.C. A maior parte do nosso foco
On the wholesale and enterprise side of the business. And most of the data, I will say all the data that you're going to see throughout the presentation has been collected firsthand from us, the analysts that work at Telegeography. And yeah, let's get started. So I want to say a few words of caution. This is a story, it's a tale, okay? But before I start, I want to say a couple of things. Telegeography has been collected this information for more than 25 years. We've been collecting pricing data since 1998, and we try to verify this data with some buyers and sellers just to make sure that the data aligns with what the market looks like. And please, keep in mind that we are talking about the weighted median. And you're going to see that there's a big range of prices. So this is the weighted median. This is the best metric that we can use in order to provide what the market looks like. You will see that there's a big range of prices, as I mentioned. There's going to be a big chunk of discounts depending on how much you buy. And yeah, that's all. So once upon a time, Andy, the little carrier, it can be any of you guys, wanted to buy bandwidth. But Andy was sad because bandwidth was very, very expensive. And then something happened. Prices fell. Yay, say Andy. So he just wanted to know what has happened. First part of the story. Bandwidth demand keeps growing. New supply and competition fuel price erosion, particularly on less developed routes. You will see that Europe and the US have the lowest prices, and Latin America, Asia, and Africa has more expensive prices. And then transit is more expensive in those markets that remain largely dependent for connectivity to the US and Europe. Okay, let's start with bandwidth demand. Overall, what you're seeing here is the demand for global bandwidth. I'm going to start checking my cheat sheet because there are a bunch of numbers that I couldn't memorize. So excuse me for that. So global bandwidth demand continues to grow, and this is pushing terrestrial and submarine cable operators to undertake extensive upgrades on their networks and deployment. If we take a look between 2016 and 2017, international bandwidth usage growth at a rate of 52%, and the amount of capacity deployed on international networks reached a total of 684 terabits per second by the end of the year, of last year. Uh-oh, I turned it off, but okay, sorry. Okay, but the rate of growth varies greatly among the different regions. Asia was the region that grew the fastest between 2013 and 2017 with a compound annual growth rate of 52%. All the other regions, the rate fell between 40 and 50%, and Latin America experienced a rate of 41%. If we take a closer look at international bandwidth in the region, we notice two things. Between 2016 and 2017, demand for international bandwidth grew at a rate of 37%, and that was the slowest pace of growth that we have observed since 2013. But despite that slow growth, bandwidth continues to double every 2 years. In 2013, the region has a total of 12 terabits per second. In 2015, it had 25 terabits per second, and last year had a total of 47 terabits per second. What about at the country level? So each country has different needs, and the demand varies greatly. Brazil, which is a major focal point for developments on the submarine cable market, accounted for about 40% of the total international bandwidth usage of Latin America, and that's about 20 Tbps. It was followed by Mexico with 9 Tbps and Argentina with 7 Tbps. But let's take a look at the smaller markets like Ecuador and Bolivia, that even though they're small in size, they experience the fastest growth with CAGR levels of over 50%. So we see that there's a lot of demand, and if there's demand for bandwidth, we should expect a lot of interest on investment, particularly on the submarine cable business. The graph shows the total amount of US billion dollars that have been spent between 2015 and 2017, and the money that will likely be spent between 2018 and 2020. I want to emphasize that between 2018 and 2020, that includes projects that are currently under construction and also projects that have been announced but probably are not fully funded, so maybe they will never happen. But we're still considering for this time frame. Also, if we see every single route has a blue bar, meaning that every single route saw at least one cable coming online between 2015 and 2017. And the same happened for what's next. Every single route at least will have one submarine cable coming online the next 2 years. In Latin America, in the past 2 years, investors have spent $1.2 billion, and it's expected, that amount is expected to be $1.4 billion for the next 2 years. There are a few projects that I would like to mention. There's one cable being developed by Google called Curry, and it will run from Chile to the US. That's on the Pacific side. There's one project in the Caribbean called Deep Blue Cable, and this system aims to connect more than 15 markets in the Caribbean, and we also land in Central America and South America. And there's 2 projects that have been announced in this in the interregional route between Brazil and Argentina. The first one is ARBR, developed by Seaborn Networks. And the second one is a cable called Malbec, developed by GlobeNet. The Trans-Pacific route is the route that will have the largest amount of money spent on subsea infrastructure, and that will be a total of $2.1 billion. So how all these bandwidth and new infrastructure affect prices? Competition drives down prices. Again, I want to emphasize this is the weighted median, okay? Let's keep that in mind, please. This graph shows the weighted median for a 10 GPS wavelength between 2015 and 2018. These are 4 core routes, and the core route for Latin America that we use is the route Miami-Sao Paulo. It's this red line. What can you see here? Is that Miami-Sao Paulo is not an outlier anymore. It's with all the other guys. In fact, prices are converging. The weighted median on these 4 routes fall under the 10,000 price. Just to give you an idea, Miami-Sao Paulo in 2015 was about 7.5 times that of London, New York, and by October of this year, it's about 2.4 times. The median monthly lease price among these routes have declined an average of 30% in the past 3 years. And as I said, weighted median, meaning that there's a big range of prices for each route. And this is what we have. So the yellow bar shows the price range for a 10 GPS wavelength as of October of this year. And the blue bar shows the median. Just to give you an example, the range of Sao Paulo goes from about $5,000 to $23,000. And the median, it's about $7,000. If we compare Latin America versus the other routes, Latin America still remains at a premium. And the same happened for routes in Africa and Oceania, like I believe Sydney, it's very expensive. Also, what does this graph tell us? That what you pay depends on how you buy. If you are a client with a large requirement of capacity, you will probably have a cheaper price. But if you are a client with a lower power of purchase, you will probably get a price on the higher end. What about prices in the region? Miami-Sao Paulo is the cheapest for this sample size. And routes follow the same trend that we're seeing in global markets. The difference between all of them is like, with the exception of Dallas, Mexico, international capacity between within Mexico and the US is mostly terrestrial. That's why prices tend to be a little cheaper than the rest of the region, while a lot of the connectivity that we see in South America and Central America involves the sub-cable part. So the last part of part 1 says that prices tend to be cheaper on cities that are less dependent on connectivity into the US and Europe. This graph shows U.S. international regional bandwidth by the end of last year, and we can see that the U.S. and Canada pretty much supply bandwidth to every single other region in the world, while Europe is the main hub for Africa and Middle Eastern markets. Let's keep this in mind, particularly on this route. I haven't pointed anything out here, but Miami is considered the hub for the internet hub for Latin America, even though Miami is part of the U.S., but it's considered the hub for all the Latin American markets. So IP transit costs less in the US and Europe. With the exception of São Paulo and Singapore, the median, the weighted median for a 10 gig IPT port by October of 2018 in London, LA, New York, and Miami fell under $1 versus São Paulo and Singapore remained at a premium. Again, there's a big range on these prices. So just to give you an idea, okay? The median for São Paulo for a 10 gig port, what we received by October was 2.25. That's the median. The low end for a 10 gig IPT port, it's about $1. So whoever is getting the dollar is getting like a really, really good price. And then let's compare Sao Paulo and Miami. Miami, the median was 43 cents of dollar, and Sao Paulo, 2.5 cents dollars. That's about 5 times of what it costs in Miami. So what does this mean? A lot of times people say, Anaí, why we don't see any markets becoming as hub of the internet, within the region? What about Fortaleza? What about Sao Paulo? What about Bogota, Panama City, even Mexico City? This is what happened. Instead of buying transit locally, many carriers buy a circuit all the way to the US, in this case Miami, and then buy transit in Miami. It's a lot cheaper, believe it or not. So that's one of the reasons why, even though carriers are adding a lot of internet, like a lot of capacity to local markets, prices are a main reason why Miami is still so prevalent for connectivity in the region. And if we compare how that has changed throughout the years, this graph shows the multiple of the local medians for a 10 gig port versus Miami. Blue bars, that was in 2015, and red bars, it's in 2018. What we can see is like the difference is becoming smaller, and that's good news. That means that carriers are really, really working on promoting, intra-regional connectivity and, to promote local markets to become hubs. Just to give you an example, Bogota was about 10 times more that you pay in Miami in 2015, and right now it's about, let's say, like 8.5. Sao Paulo used to be around, I have the exact number, 7 times, and now it's about 5 times. This is with the median. If we use the low price for each route, the difference will be smaller. So the second part of the story, subsea capacity is not necessarily the largest cost. Last mile is sometimes the longest mile. And the cost to interconnect to the data center, we're going to see how much it costs. The graph shows the percentage of the price components for a POP to POP 10 GPS on certain routes. Unfortunately, we do not have any route for Latin America, and I want to apologize for that because this is a Brazilian event. But this information, we capture this information talking with our data providers, and hopefully soon we'll have some domestic data. So what can we see here? There's no trend, or there's nothing uniform across the different 5 routes that I'm showing. So depending on where you are located, sometimes web capacity, it's the main component of your price, like in between London and Singapore, and sometimes web capacity is the smallest component of that route, like in KL and Singapore. So there's not a specific trend. This varies greatly by route. The last mile, the longest mile. This data is a little different than the one that I was showing previously. Previously, I have shown what carriers charge to their customers. This is what carriers are paying to connect to their off-network customers. And similar to the wholesale side of the business, there's a big difference among location and also like price range. It's quite large. Again, median tends to be towards the lower end of the range, meaning that most of the transactions are going to be towards the lower end. And let's take a look at London and Frankfurt. Having a low median does not suggest that the range is going to be small, as you can see here in London and Frankfurt. Sao Paulo, compared to some other markets, it's still expensive, and we do believe that local access prices in Latin America particularly tend to be more expensive than in other regions because of the early adoption of Ethernet in countries like in Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Ethernet, it's kind of like a new-ish a product on many of the carriers' portfolios. And last, how much does it cost to connect to the data center? So here we have like the average total cost of ownership per month for colocation. We have 4 assumptions. First is our baseline. Our baseline is for a rack of 4 kilowatts. Yeah. Cross connect is 1 cross connect, and the cabinet installation is the average of the installation cost over, I believe, we're considering a 2-year lease, like 24 months. So, again, big difference among different markets. And we see that cross-connect tends to be a little cheaper in Europe. In fact, it's about, the cost of cross-connect accounts for about, let me see, that's about 5% of the total cost, while in Hong Kong and New York, it's about 11%. And sorry again, apologies, no Brazilian prices, but I have a Buenos Aires quote. In Buenos Aires, it's about 60% of the total cost. And the story is about to end. So what did Andy learn, and hopefully what did you guys learn today is prices are falling in the region, but still it's cheaper in other markets. There's a lot of other costs to consider whenever you guys are dealing your prices, and Andy is happy that he learned all of that. Thank you, and I don't know if you have any questions. If no, you just can shoot me an email or talk to me today and tomorrow. I'll be around. Thank you.
Okay, Anahi. Do you have some questions for Anahi? Alguma pergunta para Anahi? Okay. Gracias, Anahi.
De nada, gracias.
Thank you.
I would like to invite now Ben Hedges.
Vamos falar pouco de EVPN technology.
We're going to talk about EVPN technology. So you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. As I say, my name is Ben Hedges. I'm the CEO of Links America, and we're a subsidiary company of the London Internet Exchange, Links in London. It's been great to hear so much from Telegeography about what's going on in London. We see that as well in terms of the transit prices. One of the reasons why I'm here today actually is because the new submarine cable coming from Brazil up to Virginia Beach lands into what we're doing in the US. We run an exchange in the Ashburn area, demand that came from that. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm here to talk to you about deploying a disaggregated model for Links's London 2 network, which sounds really technical, but I'm not that technical, so this is not going to be a technical presentation. The good news is there's an EVPN presentation coming up afterwards, thank you, that you'll learn a little bit more about EVPN. It's been 6 years since Links were at a NIC.br, PTT.br meeting. So those of you that are regular attendees will remember back in 2012, John Souter came along and talked about our experiences of our deployment and handling the London 2012 Olympics. It's as you were starting to gear up for Rio in 2016. At that time, we'd done a big migration of our primary LAN, our London 1 LAN in London, to Juniper. We were the first to deploy PTXs out into the network, and we were the first to put 100 gig ports on those PTX networks. But 6 years is a long time. And we run more than one peering LAN, and what we've been doing in the last 3 years, really, is developing what we feel is the next generation peering LAN for us. There's all sorts of pressures around what we go through, and I'll come through those as we go through the presentation a little. So I think I got these buttons right, but we'll find out. So some of this is marketing slides, I'm afraid. So this is a marketing slide. Hey, we're big, but you probably know about us. There's another marketing slide here that we run IXPs. One of the unique points about Links is we're a mutual membership organization. We're a non-profit, so we don't have any shareholders. We exist purely for the interests of our members, and we operate peering exchanges, peering LANs for them. But we also operate in the regulatory space. So we operate a little bit like a trade association. So our members that aren't big enough to have their own regulatory teams, we go in and represent as the industry if there are things that we have issues with or want to understand better in Westminster, the UK Parliament, in Brussels with the EU, and then we work closely with organizations like ISOC and the Infraestructure Internet Coalition in the US when we're talking with the FCC. And it really, really helps bring that membership feel back together. But we're here to talk about peering, really. Our members are like you find at any other peering network. They're access networks, they're ISPs, they're OTTs, but there's a huge range. We've got a lot of them. In fact, 825 now. When John came in 2012, we had just over 400. So 6 years, we've nearly doubled in size in terms of members. And I want to just remember that for a second because we're going to come back to that. And we also have changed the traffic. So in 2012, we hit a big milestone for us, which was we went through a terabit of traffic. Now we're 4 times that. So our membership has doubled, 100% growth in membership. The traffic has increased 4 times. In that time, we've had to increase staff to deal with it as well. Links is still a relatively small organization. We've got 60 staff, but we've gone up from 35. But the trouble is, in the world of being an internet exchange operator, the costs are always being driven down by the members. They need cheaper costs. In that same time period, I remember our traffic has gone up 400%, our membership has doubled, our staff costs have gone up, our revenues have only risen by around 30%. Now that's largely because we give price cuts, prices back to members every single year. But of course that is not scalable. We can't continue to do that. So one of the things that we needed to find from this new technology, this new solution, was a way to properly bring in automation to be able to deliver better, more improved services, a better range of products, but also at a cost that we could also keep driving down and keep driving that scale for our members. So as well as in London, we've got lands in Manchester, England, in Cardiff in Wales, and in Edinburgh in Scotland. Now these are run as remote exchanges, so they're not connected back to London, but they are significantly smaller. Manchester is the biggest of those three. They've got 100 ASN, so it's a good-sized regional peering land, but they don't really impact what we do in terms of what we have to achieve in London. And then we also run this exchange in Northern Virginia that I'm responsible for. We launched that in 2014, and it's now got about 20% market share in terms of the ASs that you can get in the region. And people wanted to come and see some diversity there. There was only one place you could peer previously. Now there's two, and our members tend to like that. In London, the dual lands really are completely dual and they're completely separate. So they are in the same topology, so they're based in the same data centers around London, so we're in 16 locations, and the span for that is a 65-kilometer span. So it's a big network, it's a complex network. And the London 2 land now is around the same size as the London 1 land was in 2012. So it's a big land to have to work with. In fact, as it says there, it's bigger than a lot of main European IXPs. So it's not just an afterthought, but it does give us huge benefits. By having the two lands, it enables us to actually experiment a bit more. So internally, for a while, whilst this project was going on, we called the London 2 land the innovation land, because it's where we were going to be able to trial and test new products, new ideas, new technologies that we could then roll out to the membership and into the community. So we started with a review, because that's what you always do. At the time, we'd already grown to about 700 members. There were about 300 on the London 2 land then. And we looked at what we needed to achieve. A lot of what we needed to achieve was triggered by the 100 gig orders that were starting to come through. Suddenly, we needed something that was going to be able to scale properly with the 100 gig order demand. But there was another problem as well, a technical problem that we needed to solve, which is as the number of members with 100 gig capacity orders increased, the stress and weight on those members with gig ports increased as well. When there were big traffic attacks or big attacks, the smaller members found their ports getting completely swamped. And so often they were having to disconnect and then set up their sessions afterwards going in. So we needed to find a way to scale for the large capacity members, to be able to bring costs down for the large capacity members, but also make sure that the smaller capacity members were able to keep their peering sessions up and connected. So the process that we went through took us going through a series of vendor testing. We put an RFP out and we had 6 vendors respond to that. Some, as we have traditionally used, is a single vendor with a single software solution, and others, including the solution we ultimately went with, was a disaggregated solution. So we saw that we found that we could find a solution that actually could scale and do what we wanted to do, but it would mean us moving away from our traditional single vendor and software solution. So, representing a network as big as we had and as many members as we had, that was kind of scary stuff. But we knew we had to do it because of those reasons that I mentioned earlier. What we also knew is because our budgets are run annually and we know the amount of CapEx that has to go into developing and migrating a new LAN, is that even before we'd done the deployment, that we were going to be able to pass significant savings onto the members. So in July 2016, we reduced our port fees on London 2 by 40%. Now this is in context with the regular annual port reduction fees that we do. So every year in November, we present a budget to our membership and they sign it off, and that includes prices for the following January and onwards. And for the last 15 years, that's always included a reduction in port fees of one form or another. So this July 2016 port fee reduction was in addition to one in January 2016 and one that followed in January 2017. So we were that confident in the savings we were going to be able to make from it. And as a non-profit and a mutual, we immediately passed those on to the members when we're able to. So the new solution needed to be 100 gig ready. It needed to be able to be fully automated. As I said, we can't really scale anymore the way that we're scaling. We need to be able to have more automation. And it would bring EVPN that would solve some of those problems that the smaller members will have about being able to isolate the traffic and isolate their ports. And it would mean a change in our topology. So moving from a core and edge topology that we had previously to leaf and spine. All of these combined means that we'll be the first IXP in the world to adopt these technology concepts together and put them out into a single network. So again, very nervous that we're going to try and do something quite significant, quite substantial as a change on a very big peering LAN. So we took our time over it. In fact, we actually took about 2.5 years from beginning to end to finish that. So who did we use? Who did we choose? Well, we worked with a hardware vendor called EdgeCore and a software vendor called IP Infusion. EdgeCore, essentially a white box manufacturer. Their traditional base is in the data center market, but they've started to move into the service provider market a lot more, and that kind of fits nicely with where we were and what we were doing. And IP Infusion are just coming up for being 20 years old, and they were started as a commercial-grade, hardware-independent network software solution for IPv4 initially, and then later IPv6. But what it's enabled is us to bring in this change, and it's enabled us to know that as we go to future planning, we've got a lot more control and a lot more choice. So network engineers love big shiny boxes, right? And when something starts to run a bit slower, let's buy something new and faster and shinier. But when you're trying to run an organization where you're driving prices down all the time for your customers, that just doesn't work. So we needed to find a way, and this leaf and spine way allows us to putting much more simple fixed configuration switches to expand the demand when the capacity demand comes up, rather than having to buy lots of new shiny boxes every time the new shiny box comes out. So we're a simple layer 2 provider, so it doesn't need to be complex. And the more new boxes that come out, they have huge feature sets, and we don't use those feature sets. We use a fraction of what's on the feature sets. So let's go with something that's quite simple and not very complex, and actually it means that there's going to be less errors and it's going to be less prone to failure. And we know from regularly asking our members, we have regular membership surveys, that their number one most important thing is service availability. Whole range of things, customer service, speed of response, value. So even though cost is a big driver, the number one in priority for our members is service availability, and that's where we try to focus that, without losing sight of the other things. Now this slide isn't very good here. Hopefully the picture's a bit better there. This is a technical slide, so I'm not going to spend very long on it. But as you can see, it's very straightforward. We had to be able to, still in the switches, be able to deliver services to the low capacity 1 gig members coming in, but also still be able to take their 100 gig ports as well, and a bunch of 10s. The makeup of our capacity at the moment now is around 55% of our capacity is from 100 gig ports. The rest is from 10s with a tiny slither from 1 gig ports. But the gig ports account for well over 100 members. So we have a lot of smaller members, and we're a mutual organization, so they are just as important, and we want to look after them just the same way. The one bit of technical information I can give you, but don't ask me to explain it, is that the chipset is the Broadcom Tomahawk chipset, which apparently means something to people that understand it, but not a lot to me. And this translates straight over into essentially the switch design, which again, looks a bit better on there than it does on the screen that's in front of me here. So disaggregation, it's kind of a buzzword. It really just means we're separating out the hardware and software vendors. So it means that we go and get a generic switch, a white box switch from one source, and then we can go and independently select the software from another. It's been going on for quite a long time in the service space. It allows the organizations, the vendors, to focus on the things that they are best at, and so you tend to try and get best in class in terms of each of the different disciplines. And from our point of view, it means that we're able to select and change suppliers as depend on our needs. So if something changes, or there's a new technology or new product that we want to bring out, we don't necessarily have to wait for a single vendor roadmap to get there. Or have to change the whole thing out just to change to a vendor that is going to get to that point on the roadmap sooner. This way, it may be a software development, and if the software vendor that we're not using roadmap doesn't get there fast enough, we can just change the software vendor. The switch doesn't have to change. Same on the switches. If the switches don't have the density or the capacity that we need going forward, say 400 gig, terabit, whatever it is that the roadmap is to, then we don't necessarily have to change the software vendor either. So it gives us a lot more choice, it gives us a lot more control, and ultimately it means we can deliver a lot more value and benefit back to our members. So that flexibility is really key for us, but the flexibility isn't just for us. The flexibility is also to members, because members can then see, and they're managing their traffic with the EVPN technology coming in, and I say I'm not going to try and do the technical side of EVPN, but that increased flexibility the members get from a technical point of view with EVPN adds additional value to them, as well as the cost saving that we're trying to deliver through, and as well as the confidence we're going to be able to grow at scale for a long time. So it means we can play the long game. We can sit in, plan in. Previously, we maybe would run on a 4 to 5 year roadmap for vendor and vendor technology. By taking this disaggregated approach, it means it's always a fluid thing. So we're a lot more fluid, but we can play longer as well. So I'm going to just take you through briefly the process here before I take a couple of questions. The big thing, as I say, is that for both members, but also us, scale and the amount of traffic that people are moving now is growing all the time. And so we needed a way that everything could be automated, nicely programmed, and everything with EP can be nicely and automatically programmed, or effectively programmed. The switches communicate at a MAC address, so they're synchronized, and so they're a lot more predictable. It gives a lot more stability to come in. And the flexibility I've already talked about in terms of the flexibility, in terms of the control of the switch or the end ports coming through, the flexibility in terms of us with our vendor and our vendor choices, means it's the right way, EVPN is the technology, but also the disaggregated solution is the right way for us to go forward. So it took just 2.5 years. It was a long process, a lot longer than we took to migrate the bigger, at the time, London One LAN, but that's because we were moving to an unknown territory for us, so we wanted to be really sure. So we went through several stages. For several nicely phase stages, we went through a demonstrative phase. So the vendors had to come up, they had to show us that it was going to work, that we were going to achieve the goals that we wanted to do. And then throughout the rest of 2016, early 2017, we did a lot of prototyping. Our engineers spent a huge amount of time at POX over in Taiwan, over in the Bay Area, making sure that we've got this right mix, because we're mixing these two vendors together that was going to work and meet our requirements. And then we gradually began to get down to what we needed to deliver. We started to get through some of the final lists of bugs, ready to go out. But we're testing all the time on this, because it's a big migration to do. And we were ready at the beginning of this year. So early 2018, we started to deploy the kit out into the locations. So 16 data centers in London, and those locations often had more than one switch, particularly where there was a high density of members and high density of traffic there. So as the deployment went forward, we then followed through with the migration. And the migration, we eventually moved all the members over and kept the previous equipment, previous LAN running at the same time for around 4 weeks. And then in June, it was fully operational. So we turned everything else off, tore everything else out, and we were finally done. So from that first decision to look at it in November 2015 through to when we actually made a vendor choice in the middle of 2016 was a two-year process. But we think we were right to take our time on that. And we still are happy that we did the big port discount in early 2016 to reflect that, because ultimately the cost didn't really change. We were able to manage the growth of the London 2 before the migration happened enough for that not to be a significant pain point. So now we're moving through into an enhancement phase. So we're looking to add new feature sets, we're looking to add new feature releases, software releases, and to move forward to be much more fully automated. So that's still a work in progress. We've only had a DevOps team in Links for around 5 years, so we're starting to get up to a good pace now. But there's always something new that comes along, and there's always something new, feature requests from members that we want to see, that we want to try and integrate into what we're doing. So for the marketplace, what's it mean? We've really achieved what we set out to achieve. This is another marketing slide, and it's really in there because what we're trying to say is we appreciate that we have a responsibility, a role as one of the leading IXs in the world, one of the biggest IXs in the world, to lead, to do leading edge technology stuff, to go out and try these new things, because then hopefully the rest of the IX world, if they feel that it's appropriate for them, can learn from that and take advantage of that, because we're all feeling the same pressures. All the networks are trying to drive down prices. We all need to find ways to run our networks more efficiently, better quality, and cheaper. So being a top 3 network, and there's loads of ways you can measure that, by the way. We're probably number 1 in terms of the biggest membership organization. We're probably number 3 in terms of traffic. But that's a marketing slide, so I'll move on from it. But everybody, all of our members have benefited. So the smaller networks, those issues that we're having with background traffic, getting their ports flooded, that can go away, and that can be managed, and so they'll have a lot more value out of their peering rather than having to disconnect things and reconnect sessions up just because there's been a big batch of traffic come in that they don't really need or they need to be able to drop. The larger networks, they're going to have the benefit from the scale that we can bring in for them and deliver that scale, but they're also going to see the real cost benefits. So the way that we work at Links in terms of pricing, we have a membership fee, an annual membership fee, that includes a gig port at every single peering LAN. So we have an awful lot of members who just pay the membership fee. So there's no change or reduction in port fees for them. But as you work out through into the 10 and 100 gig ports, they're paying a monthly recurring charge for that. And so the more we can drive that price down for them, the happier they are and the more effective the cost of their peering is. And the final point, coming back to what I said very early on, is that everything here was designed with automation in mind, because it's just not practical to be able to scale the sort of way that we expect traffic to scale over the next 5 to 10 years without having automation and be able to do that. The number of physical heads we'd have to employ against a decreasing cost of sale, but an increasing cost of running the network just wouldn't work without it. So if you were expecting a technical presentation, I apologize. Hopefully it's not been too taxing towards the end of the day for you. And I've got a minute or two to take questions if there are any.
Yeah, some questions for Ben. Alguma pergunta para o Ben?
Any questions for Ben?
Por favor, se apresente e coloque o microfone.
Olá, Douglas Fischer, tudo bem? O caso de vocês da desagregação é espetacular, ainda mais usando VXLAN em cima da rede. Mas um dos aspectos importantes da desagregação é a confiança que você teria no futuro de poder utilizar um outro vendor ou de caixa ou de software. E é justamente essa a pergunta que eu tenho para vocês agora. Vocês, por exemplo, num momento como agora, ou talvez daqui a algum tempo, teriam confiança em utilizar um outro vendor de caixa, diferente da Edcore, ou uma outra solução que não a IP Infusion no ambiente de vocês?
Okay, I'm afraid the translation wasn't working on my headphones. So if somebody would be able to...
Make it in English.
Okay.
Okay. One of the advantages of using disaggregation is to be able to choose different vendors in different parts of your network. let's say, for example, you will do an expansion on a part of the network, and instead of using edge core on that place, use another one. Are you confident? Do you trust to do this choice, and in this case, or another vendor of the software instead of IP Infusion?
We haven't got to that stage yet because these are new relationships that we're really happy with. But certainly that's part of the decision-making process that we went through, is how easy is it going to be able to switch in. I mean, we run effectively now equipment on 3 vendors. So London 1 is a Juniper LAN, the London 2 is this disaggregated solution, and in Manchester we run Extreme boxes, actually same in Scotland and Cardiff, and then in Northern Virginia we're on Juniper boxes as well. So the network engineers are quite confident and comfortable working with different boxes. We actually have, for a while we had some Juniper kit off the edge of the Manchester Exchange because we had a 100 gig member demand that we weren't able to deliver in there. So we're used to trying to blend in, but typically we try and keep it as easy as possible for the engineers, because the more they've got to learn, the harder it just makes their job.
Okay, I believe that just the possibility to change will keep the animals of the prices a little bit lower.
Yeah, that's the whole aim. Keep the prices low, but the service even better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ok. Alguma outra pergunta?
Any other questions?
Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Continuando aqui as apresentações, gostaria de convidar o Aloysio.
Next, I'd like to invite Aloysio from Unitech, who will address EVPN, a new way to interconnect. Good afternoon. My name is Aloysio. I am a consultant at Unitech. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting us to talk about EVPN. I know that you are all willing to have a beer. I have read quite a lot about EVPN, and we have some trends showing that this protocol came to stay. That is a new concept. There is a very interesting blog distinguishers. It says that EVPN in the translation, it's the new kids on the block. It came to really enhance and to show off in this world of interconnection. I have worked for many years as a service provider. I never saw an application in just a data center in a faster environment where we see things happening much faster. And then we are doing much more now for service provider. Well, this is the agenda to talk about EVPN. VXLAN, that is a very interesting topic. As they both work together, we have to understand what is the principle of VXLAN, some benefits, concepts, application, and then we make a summary about a paradigm split to know where we can go with EVPN and XLAN. And also we saw a nice presentation about network evolutions using a different concept. Now we have a concept that we can keep in mind to the future. Well, about the company, briefly, at ETech, that is a new company we just opened this year. We are professionals at the market. We are service providers. We've been working in this field for over 15 years with connectivity, and we founded the company to support those entities which find necessary to have some support in the communication market. What is a VPN? Why do we have this new protocol? Where are we going to apply it? A VPN comes from Ethernet VPN. That is a new protocol, and the idea is to promote connectivity that has high adherence in the data center market with some applications in that scenario. And today, new models, new functionalities to the service provider market. There is a strong appeal for network simplicity today to perform a number of services which we are usually using as part of the technology. We address several things to the protocol layer where they have to address those needs, and that becomes so complex. They become very, very complex, and they do not meet some requirements of the modern world, and EVPN is here to address some of them. That is a simple protocol, as I told you, and it meets all services. That service which we are used to doing, layer 2 communication, LE3 VPN, EPP, which are common in the market, newer applications, GL3 in data center. But we have a number of protocols. If the idea was just to simplify, why not evolve traditional protocols? They are all implemented with all suppliers, vendors. Why don't we make better use of that? An interesting principle is, let's start from what we have. Let's get the protocols as we do today and how to improve them. Today, VPNs, we know them very well as VPN of layer 2 or 3. Layer 2 VPN, they are the traditional ones supported by the LAM extensions. But some implications, some restrictions, and then we have 3-layer FRCBs, and now 43, 64. And to meet all requirements that became very complex. Several features which have to be attributed to the protocol to meet all requirements. One of the main trends of the market, what motivates the implementation of new protocols, are those requirements made by the market. One of the main daily trends is the virtualization market and the cloud market. Trends, they show and investments are being made to a cloud market. Today, all documents researches that is an increasing growing market from a demand standpoint, investments and revenue. So it came to stay with some specificities. very specific requirements, and with those traditional protocols, it's not feasible that those applications will be successful or that will meet the requests. Now we take a VPN to address to some of the problems we had. Traditional protocols of layer 2 or layer 3, they had some specificities. Layer 2, for instance, they have the whole principle of Ethernet communication. They see some problems, such as food and learn, which is intrinsic to the protocol, that somehow is a prerequisite to be addressed in the EVPN. And some other applications, such as virtualization and cloud, data center, interconnect. Today we have totally two different worlds. One of layer 2 and one of layer 3. Imagine a request where both worlds are together. That was a request which was not addressed by the current protocols. Let's see now if we solved that.
Bom, primeira coisa, toda vez que a gente ouve falar de EVPN, às vezes a gente ouve falar também.
Every time we hear about EVP,
Eles são a mesma coisa.
we hear about VXLAN. One does not live without the other one. EVPN needs VXLAN. Let's see and try to understand. VXLAN, what's that? That's a protocol in the overlay layer which allows network virtualization. What is the main driver? The main driver was to address a limitation of segments to data centers. The cloud market is growing exponentially, but we had the frame Ethernet, where we know the avalanche. We have a limited capacity of bits, and we are limited to 4,000 bits, in addition to some other traditional problems of this world. And then VXLAN comes as a solution to address that. That is an extension of that field, which now is called differently. And that came just to solve one of these problems. And then it increases that ability, allowing a greater scalability of that. Another interesting aspect of VXLAN is when we have the whole internet frame, including the header. One of the simplest protocols, the VP, which helps a lot our networks and a number of restrictions from the legacy networks. With the beginning of its action, we have to intertwine them. What is the simplest way of doing that interconnection of several points using an underlay layer? What is the simplest and highest implemented layer today? Is the IP one, which is being implemented at several vendors. That's a very cheap way to do that. We can do the implementation using the IP layer despite of the vendor and the several existing protocols. With that, we'll create an overlay layer, which is to intertwine different points, several points over that layer. VXLAN, on the other hand, which I will not get into details about nomenclature, but VXLAN is not so perfect. It addresses several things, but it has some limitations. One of them is the Ethernet baseline principle, food in learning approach. And we can do that in some ways. And the model, the most adapted and applied model to that, is using a different protocol, which is the base of our presentation, which is EVPN. We integrate VXLAN with EVPN. And to address all that amount, to have scalability, considering that this is a market of fast growth, we will use some protocols that we know for larger scales of distribution, which is BGP. VXLAN is one of the first ones for overlay, one of the most deployed overlay protocols. As I told you, there are a number of limitations, but today is highly implemented at several places. We see several people using VXLAN. We have some other protocols which are growing and which try to solve some overlay problems. There is another protocol, Geneva, which promises to address some intrinsic limitations to VXLAN. There are some other protocols, VXLAN GP, some discussions at the ETF to allow new protocols at the overlay layer addressing those limitations. Some EVPN concepts. Well, what are the benefits of this technology? There are several things that VPN can solve to us. We had some limitations, characteristics of a traditional Ethernet. Some we could not do, where we would turn on a switch to the Ethernet and let them active. We had some loop problems with protocols of resilience. Mobility of VNs. These are data center requests, and you have to be flexible. So a protocol is required to support that. We have to minimize traffic flow. And a number of other applications, among them some solutions for layer 2 and 3 application. We see that the traditional implemented VPNs using BGP, segmentations, and that has the same principle, which is a BGP family, using some benefits. I had anticipated myself here as the way we learn. We have the PA communication, PASA, I think he said. PE, it works as a proxy, avoiding ARP flow to remote destinations. within the VPN in a local environment. That is a normal process, but as it is an external communication that will act as a proxy with several improvements which were implemented in addition to those regular ones that are required for applications such as resilience, mobility, agility, everything we see as requests for new apps. They are all addressed here in the VPN. EVPN principle of action. There are two different communication plans. One is a control plan and the other one is a data control plan. EVPN together with the BGP. And that may work over several overlay layers. EVPN will work not only with VXLAN. We see both protocols working jointly, and they can use several others, such as MPDSE, MPLS, I should say. They are supported as a data plane to EVPN. We have some other protocols such as VXLAN, Geneve, SSTT, PBB, MAC. With all this architecture, EVPN will be close to those apps or scenarios which are more familiar to service providers. Here we have an overview of a VPN communication. We have some acronyms here and some definitions that we'll have to try to understand while we study EVPN. So we'll have that in the VPN, VIII, some sentences or acronyms which are common at this market and which you have to study and get familiarized. What is the communication principle? An overlay layer, and the packages will be tunneled. End-to-end communication, but packages will be encapsulated. Thanks to a control plan, you can carry out communication, protocol distribution, to have a CPE communicating to two different and simultaneous EVPN. This morning, we had a presentation where we were discussing about modernization or to simplify carriers' networks. When we are talking about data center, we see the simplification carried out with this type of protocol. We find several papers of implementations of data center interconnect, virtualization, and so on and so forth, in partnership of VPNX LAN partnership. We have network hubs or cores which use as a basic principle EVPN VXLAN. Vendors, they would suggest us the evolution of MPLS. The evolution of MPLS, some of them see as a Springer, as a router, the whole layer. Why not performing that network evolution using VXLAN? That is a paradigm break for the codes we have today. They can address most services available today, and we no longer need those complex routers. Then we would be able to deliver the service we have today using a fabric. Our network cut would be a fabric. We do not have much to say about implementation of network core, but that is common at data centers. So maybe we can bring that to reality and to consider how to do it, how to address those applications using new protocols. So EVPN came to stay. Those of you who did not show any curiosity in learning more about that, I think you should start doing that right now, understand the principles of that, because in the future we will see a huge change in the market of connectivity. And I guess that VPN will be responsible for one of those changes that we will foresee and which will last long. That's it for now. Thank you. Well, we have still a few minutes for your questions. I am Volio from. I have two questions. VXLAN has a higher overhead in each one of the packages, around 50 bytes per package, bits per package. What is your opinion? Is that worthwhile, or depending on the type of network application can be an advantage or a problem? There are those vendors that they advocate for the use of VPN and others focusing VPN with VLAN. Do you see any restriction, or why are you paying more attention to VXLAN? And third, you have a network based on NPLS. Well, let's try to start from the beginning and help me if I forgot anyone. First, you want to know about the size of the package with a larger overhead. Well, I did not see much restriction in the use of VXLAN, as they use a greater or a larger header. On the contrary, I saw some benefits in having that VXLAN encapsulation that was very helpful and addressed some problems we had in the past. I did not see anything bad about that. And your last question about the transition of MPLS to VXLAN. Well, that has to be done gradually. There is no defined step by step. I believe that those scenarios where you are able to divide and to simplify your network, that is a good idea. I think you should consider VXLAN as a evolution, step by step, how to do that. Well, we still have to consider it as each one has their applications, their problems. MPLS is used different by several companies. We have some who use that in a more complex way, and some of them they use the basic of NPLS. All of that has to be considered at the time of migration. But there is no way out. That's how you have to do it. And last, how to use EVPN in the VXLAN or with MPLS, right? Right. That's the perfect marriage. EVPN, VXLAN. Even if it's possible to use that on a data plan, they still see some limitations that were well addressed using other protocols. As far as I understand, I think they were well solved with VXLAN. That will change still, but most implementations will be along those lines. Okay? I am representing here the University of Rio Grande do Sul. EVPN became a buzzword. Since last year, everyone talks about VXLAN, BGP, GBPS, and so on. And some university networks, campus, companies, enterprises, they say we have to have a VXLAN because the guy from Juni, from Cisco, they told us this and that. And there are those that they have to implement a VPN, VXLAN. Let's make very clear that this is a good solution for service providers. If you have a data center and if you want to have different people from different network, fine. But not for enterprises unless you have 3 or 4 data centers. People, they want to follow that fad. Maybe that is not the best idea. Or maybe find a different solution. Well, people are going to that wave and they do not know very well how to use that. I see that happening at several networks. I don't know if you are experiencing the same. Do you see that type of thing or not? Well, I haven't seen a clear demand by the client, but as you said, there are some enthusiasts about that, and they are highly guided to the vendor. When the vendor, they see that business, they try to create a concept, and there are those that they want it to be very fast, pioneers. Well, it's quite natural that they want to see that, but you have to respect the right number of applications. Yeah, this is the new kids on the block. Anything else to Luizio? Thank you. That's it. Thank you. With that, we are closing our first day of IX Fórum. So don't miss the beer, gear, and peer. Not necessarily at this order. So enjoy as much as you can. And thank you so much to all our sponsors. Without them, that would not be possible. Google, Facebook, Abranet, Cisco, TEDx Extreme. That's it for now. Goodbye. He's still listing the very important sponsors. Thank you to all of you. See you tomorrow.
passador? Está lá em cima.